Censorship in Hong Kong, which refers to the suppression of speech or other public communication, raises issues regarding the freedom of speech. By law, censorship is usually practiced against the distribution of certain materials, particularly child pornography, obscene images, and reports on court cases which may lead to unfair trial. Prior to the transfer of sovereignty over Hong Kong in 1997, Hong Kong boasted one of the highest degrees of press freedom in Asia. Since the handover to China, Hong Kong has been granted relative legal, economic, and political autonomy under the one country, two systems policy. In contrast to the rest of China, where control over media is pervasive, Hong Kong's freedom of speech, of the press, and of publication are protected under Article 27 of the Hong Kong Basic Law and Article 16 of the Hong Kong Bill of Rights. Observers have noted a trend of increasing threats to press freedom in the territory, including physical attacks on journalists, acts targeted at liberal media and against their owners, withdrawal of advertising revenues, and appointment of compliant pro-Beijing chief editors. The decline in Hong Kong's ranking on the Press Freedom Index published annually by Reporters Without Borders has been vertiginous. It stood at 80th in 2020, having dropped 9 places since 2015. It ranked 18th place in 2002. In 2020 under the Hong Kong National Security Law enacted by the Chinese central government, the Commissioner of Police was granted the authority to compel cooperation or the removal of content by service providers if deemed a threat to national security, while there are now prohibitions on the incitement of hatred against the government of China or Hong Kong. Despite guarantees of free speech, public surveys in 1997 showed increasing fears of self-censorship by journalists of writings critical of the central government. Although journalists indicated in a survey from the Hong Kong Journalists Association that they overwhelmingly did not hesitate to publish criticisms of China, and that actual instances of direct pressure from the Chinese government to change news were very rare. Since the handover, Hong Kong newspapers have increased their use of a self-declared editorial independence as a marketing tool towards international audiences. In 1998, there was a controversy about remarks made by magazine publisher Zhu Simon alleging anti-mainland bias from the government-funded broadcaster RTHK. Although pro-RTHK commentators saw Zhu's comments as coming from Beijing, central government representatives distanced themselves from his comments. In 2001, the HKJA expressed concerns that governments and Tang Chi-Hawa's shrill rhetoric threatens open debate by encouraging self-censorship. Hong Kong's ranking on the Press Freedom Index published annually by Reporters Without Borders was 18th in 2002. Since then, a number of factors, particularly self-censorship, and high-profile incidents affecting the media have pointed to increasing erosion of journalists' ability to report the news in an objective manner. In 2011, Hong Kong Journalists Association chairwoman Mak Yin Ting commented on self-censorship due to growing business ties between Beijing and media owners, asserting that, now, more than half of Hong Kong media bosses or high media management have been absorbed by the communist government. They may consider whether reporting on some issues will affect the relationship between their bosses and the government. That year, Hong Kong's ranking on the Press Freedom Index dropped 20 places to 54th place. In a report published alongside the index, it was noted that arrests, assaults and harassment worsened working conditions for journalists to an extent not seen previously, a sign of a worrying change in government policy. Hong Kong's ranking in the index, which stood at 61st in 2014, gave up 9 further places in the 2015 report. Police misconduct was cited as a factor. Journalists have complained about sensitive news stories critical of the government that they have been under undisguised pressure to change or soften. Penn Center believes that the controversy surrounding Tsai Lung's dealings with UGL was seriously underreported in some media outlets. An increasing incidence of physical violence against journalists has been recorded, with the police being implicated in some of these. Namely, the Hong Kong Journalists Association noted that there were at least 28 attacks on journalists covering the umbrella revolution. All told, the incidence of censorship, political pressure to self-censor and intimidation is increasing. According to PEN American Center, International Federation of Journalists, during the 2.5-month protests in 2014, the patchy coverage of events and viewpoints on traditional media turned young people to social media for news. The Guardian described the protests as the best documented social movement in history. With even its quieter